The Nexus Verith station had been floating in neutral space for over 3,000 years. It was old, the kind of old that made most alien visitors go quiet when they walked through its main corridors. The walls were made of a dark gray stone-like material that no one alive could fully name. The lights were always a little too dim, and the air had a smell that nobody ever talked about but everybody noticed. It was the home of the Galactic Council, the place where more than 200 spacefaring civilizations came together to talk, argue, trade, and keep the peace. It was, in theory, the most important place in the known galaxy. Today, the main chamber was full. Councillor Vreth sat near the front of the curved hall, his blue-scaled fingers folded on the table in front of him. He was old even for a Varoan, which was saying something. He had attended council sessions for over 2 centuries, and in all that time, he had learned one very important skill: knowing when a room was about to go wrong. The session had started normally enough. The Grand Navigational Archive was being updated, a process done every 50 years, when all civilizations were asked to submit new star charts, patrol routes, and outpost data. It was mostly routine. Most delegates barely paid attention. Ambassador Calvin Holt paid attention to everything. He sat in the human section of the chamber, a quiet corner near the back, with a small delegation of 3 people. Calvin was in his mid-40s, with a calm face and dark eyes that moved slowly around the room as if he was always reading something that no one else could see. He said very little during council sessions. But when he did speak, people tended to listen. Beside him sat Lieutenant Dana Ford, his military liaison. She was younger, late 20s, with short brown hair and the kind of stillness that came not from being bored but from paying very close attention. She was watching the other delegates the way someone watches a crowd when they already know something is about to happen. The archive update was going smoothly. Species after species submitted their data. The great map on the chamber's central display grew more detailed by the minute. New routes added in gold, new outposts marked in blue, new territorial borders drawn in clean white lines. Then came the human section. On the map, human space sat like a solid block, a large, clean-edged territory with nothing inside it. No routes. No outpost markers. No planetary names. No patrol data. Just a hard border and a simple label: human jurisdiction. It had looked that same way for 200 years. The data void covered a region larger than most empires in the chamber. Larger than the Varoan territory. Larger than the Drevathi Commonwealth. Larger, even, than the old Mechari trade zone that had taken 4 centuries to build. A new voice broke the silence of the archive review. It came from the Kaith section, a young species, recently admitted to the council, still learning how things worked. Their delegate was a small creature named Selu, with wide yellow eyes and a habit of speaking before thinking. Selu raised one thin arm and submitted a formal inquiry through the council system. The request appeared on the display in clean council text. The Kaith delegation formally requests that the human delegation provide updated navigational data for the purposes of archive accuracy. The room went very still. Vreth felt it immediately, that particular silence that meant something important had just happened. He looked around slowly. He counted 11 delegates who had, in the space of about 3 seconds, suddenly found something very interesting to look at on their own tables. No one looked at the human section. Selu, confused, looked directly at Ambassador Calvin Holt. Calvin looked back at the young Kaith delegate with a calm, polite expression. He did not look uncomfortable. He did not look angry. He looked, if anything, like a man who had been asked a question he had already answered many times before and was perfectly willing to answer again. He pressed the response button. "The human delegation thanks the Kaith delegation for their inquiry," he said, in a voice that was warm and unhurried. "We will take it under advisement." Then he said nothing more. The session moved on. The archive update continued. Other species submitted their data. The map grew and grew, full and detailed in every section, except one. That evening, in a quiet corridor near the Varoan residential section, Vreth found Selu standing alone and looking lost. He stopped beside the young delegate and spoke in a low voice, without looking at them. "You are new here," Vreth said, "so I will tell you something that no one will put in any official record." He paused. "There are questions you do not ask at this council. Most of them you will figure out over time. But that one, He glanced toward the direction of the main chamber. "That one you learn on your first day." Selu looked up at him with wide yellow eyes. "But why?" Selu asked. "It is just a map." Vreth was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "That is what everyone thought the first time." The drift was not the kind of place you found on official maps. It existed in that gray space between rules, a massive free station anchored near a dim yellow star 3 systems away from the nearest council post. No single species owned it. No government taxed it. It ran on deals, favors, and the mutual understanding that everyone there had something they would rather not explain. Calvin Holt liked it immediately. He had come here for a side negotiation, a small trade arrangement between a human shipping company and a Mechari cargo group. The kind of quiet, practical business that kept things running without needing a council session to approve it. He had brought Pete Callahan, his aide, to handle the social parts of things. Pete was good at the social parts. Pete Callahan was 32 years old, from a small town in West Texas, and had the kind of easy friendliness that made strangers feel like they had known him for years. He could haggle in 4 languages and make it feel like a conversation. Calvin kept him around because the galaxy, it turned out, responded very well to a man who was genuinely interested in everything. The third member of the group was Nor, a human cartographer attached to the Council's scientific division. She was in her early 30s, quiet, precise, with a habit of tilting her head slightly when she was thinking. She had been brought along to review the star charts that the trade agreement would affect. She had not expected to find anything unusual. She found something unusual. It started small. Pete was at a market stall near the station's lower ring, looking at a collection of old navigation tokens, physical coins that alien pilots used to mark routes they had traveled. He was turning one over in his hand when an old alien merchant appeared beside him. Oren was Mechari, which meant he had 6 limbs, a wide flat face, and skin the color of dried clay. He was very old, with scars across 2 of his upper arms and the slow, careful movements of someone who had spent most of his life doing something difficult. He had been trading near the edge of human space for 80 years. He looked at Pete for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "Are you one of the border humans?" he asked, "or one of the interior ones?" Pete blinked. "I'm sorry. Border or interior?" Oren said again, as if it were a perfectly normal question. "I'm from Earth," Pete said. "Is that border or interior?" Something changed in Oren's face. All 6 of his facial ridges went pale at once, a Mechari reaction that Pete had learned, in his time working with alien species, meant something close to shock. Oren took one quiet step back, gave Pete a polite nod that managed to be both respectful and a farewell at the same time, and walked away without another word. Pete stood at the stall for a moment, holding the navigation token. Nor had seen the whole thing from 3 steps away. She spent the rest of that afternoon asking questions. She was careful about it. She did not ask directly, did not make it obvious. She was a cartographer. She had learned that the best way to find what you were looking for was to approach it from the side. What she found was this: no alien captain in living memory had voluntarily entered human space. Not one. There were traders who worked close to the border, pilots who occasionally crossed into the outer edge zones with human permission, and diplomats who had traveled to Earth or to the handful of human stations near the boundary. But interior human space, the deep core of that great blank block on the map, had not been entered by a non-human ship in recorded history. Then she found the expedition records. 3 of them, spread across 2 centuries. 3 separate attempts by alien scientific groups to chart the interior of human space. The first had been a Varuan survey team, 212 years ago. The second was a Drevathi research vessel, 140 years back. The third was a joint Kaith-Mechari expedition, attempted just 60 years ago before the Kaith had even joined the Council. All 3 had returned. All 3 had come back with their navigation systems wiped clean, not damaged, not corrupted, but cleanly and completely erased as if they had never recorded anything at all. All 3 crews had shown signs of what the medical reports described as deep route trauma, a term that appeared in none of the standard medical indexes Nor could find. And all 3 crews had refused to file detailed reports, submitting only short statements that said, in slightly different words, the same thing. They had made a navigational error, realized it, and corrected course. Not one crew member from any of the 3 expeditions had ever spoken publicly about what they had seen. Nor brought the file to Calvin that night. He read it slowly, sitting at the small table in his quarters aboard their docked ship. He did not say anything while he read. He went through every page, every medical note, every short statement. Then he closed the file and sat quietly for a moment. "What do you think they saw?" he asked. Nor had been turning that question over in her head all evening. "I don't know," she said honestly. "The data is all missing. There's nothing to go on. Just the fact that they won't talk about it." Calvin nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Keep it that way for now." Nor looked at him. "You know something," she said. Calvin looked at her with that same calm, unreadable expression he wore in the council chamber. "I know some things," he said. "Not enough to say out loud yet." He handed the file back to her and went to bed. Later that night, Nor found Pete in the small common room at the front of the ship, sitting in the dark with a star map pulled up on the table display. The map showed the wider galaxy, hundreds of civilizations, thousands of systems, all charted in clean detail. Except for that one section. Pete was staring at it. "I grew up in Kansas," he said quietly, without turning around. "There's a lot of flat land. Long drives between towns. I used to sit in the back seat and watch the fields go by for hours." He paused. "I never thought about what was between the towns. Just the towns themselves." He pointed at the blank block on the map. "This is the biggest piece of between I've ever seen," he said. Nor sat down across from him and looked at the map. Neither of them said anything else for a long time. Waypoint Niner did not appear on any map shared with the Galactic Council. It was listed in human navigational records simply as a frontier monitoring station, which was technically accurate in the same way that calling the ocean a large amount of water was technically accurate. Dana Ford arrived there alone, on a small transport that had taken 4 days to reach the outer edge of human space from Nexus Verith. She had been told it was a routine security briefing. She had been told a lot of things over the course of her career that turned out to be something other than routine. Commander Ray Sutton met her at the docking port. He was in his late 50s, a tall man with a weathered face and gray at his temples, the kind of man who had clearly spent most of his life in places that were difficult to get to. He shook her hand once, firmly, and started walking. Dana followed. The station was larger than she had expected. 6 connected rings, all of them running smoothly, all of them clean and well-maintained. The crew moved with quiet efficiency. Nobody seemed tense. Nobody seemed afraid. They seemed, if anything, like people who had simply gotten very used to something that most people had not gotten used to yet. Dana noticed the windows about 10 minutes into the tour. Every window on the side of the station that faced the interior of human space, the deep inward direction, away from the border and toward the center, was covered. Not broken, not damaged. Covered deliberately, with smooth gray panels bolted firmly in place. She counted 7 of them before she said anything. "Why are those blocked?" she asked. Ray kept walking. "Reduces distraction," he said. "From what?" He stopped at a corridor junction and turned to look at her directly for the first time. "You ask a lot of questions," he said. It was not a complaint. It sounded more like an observation he approved of. "I was sent here to be briefed," Dana said. "Right," he said. He started walking again. "The windows face inward. We don't monitor inward." Dana kept pace with him. "Then what do your sensors monitor?" "Outward," he said. "Everything outward. The border, the neutral zone, alien traffic, everything that comes from outside human space." "So who monitors the interior?" she asked. Ray was quiet for 3 full steps. "Not who," he said. "What?" He led her to a large monitoring room near the center of the station. It was quiet in there, about 8 crew members at their consoles, all of them focused, none of them talking much. One of them was a young woman named Leah Garner, barely 24 years old, sitting at a signals console near the far wall. She had the eyes of someone much older, the kind of stillness that came from spending a long time in a place that changed you. Dana stood in the doorway and looked around the room. The sensor displays all showed the same thing, the outward view. The border zone. The empty space between human territory and the alien civilizations beyond it. Rich with data, carefully watched. She looked for any display facing inward. There was none. You said something is monitoring inward, Dana said to Ray. What is it? Ray pulled up a chair and sat down, which was the first time since her arrival that he had stopped moving. He folded his arms and looked at her the way a man looks at someone he is about to tell something important, not with drama, but with the careful seriousness of a person who chooses their words because they know words matter. It was here before us, he said simply. Before the first human ships reached this part of space. Before the first human colony was planted anywhere near here. It was already here, and it was already watching. We built our stations and settlements around it. We drew our territory lines around the space it occupies. And we pointed all our sensors outward, because inward, he paused, inward is already being watched by something that does a better job of it than we ever could. Dana sat down slowly. Leah, at her console, spoke without turning around. It is not hostile, she said quietly. We think. We have been trying to understand what hostile would even mean to something that old, and we are not sure the word applies. How old? Dana asked. Older than the Council, Ray said. Older than most of the species on it. Older, we think, than recorded alien history. Does Earth Command know? Dana asked. Ray looked at her with the faint expression of a man who has just been asked if the sun rises in the east. Earth Command wrote the protocols, he said. The protocols say, do not map it. Do not name it. Do not invite the neighbors over until we understand it better. Dana sat with that for a moment. Then she asked the question that had been building since she left Nexus Verith. Does it know we're here? Does it know about the Council, about the other species? Yes, Ray said. Has it ever responded to them? Not directly, Ray said. Not yet. That night, a signal came through one of the interior relay points, a channel that was normally used for automated system checks. It was not automated. It was not a system check. It was a pattern, long and slow and precise, that Dana could not identify as any known language, any known signal format, or any known natural phenomenon. Leah logged it without looking up, typing quickly and calmly. Dana leaned over and looked at the log entry. It read, Interior Contact, Classification 7. Timestamp noted. What is Classification 7? Dana asked. Leah stopped typing. She turned slowly and looked at Dana with those old, careful eyes. It means, Leah said quietly, that it noticed you arrived. Dana was quiet the rest of the night. Before she went to sleep, she sent Calvin a single encrypted message. It was short. She had thought for a long time about how to word it, and in the end she kept it simple. It read, I think the map is not blank because we are hiding something from them. I think it is blank because we are protecting them from it. She sent it and lay in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the station, and thought about the covered windows, and what was on the other side of them. The closed session was called without much warning. A formal notice went out to all major delegations on a Tuesday morning, Council Standard Time, and by Wednesday afternoon, the main chamber at Nexus Verith was filled with the representatives of the 12 largest civilizations in the known galaxy. It was the kind of gathering that happened maybe once a decade. The kind that meant something had been decided before anyone arrived, and the session itself was just the part where it became official. High Arbiter Khan presided. The Drevithi were the oldest space-traveling species currently active in the Council. Khan was old even for a Drevithi, nearly translucent, with a body that moved slowly and carefully, as if age itself had become something physical that had to be carried. Khan had been High Arbiter for longer than most of the species in the room had been spacefaring. And yet, from the moment the session was called to order, Khan looked, to anyone paying close attention, slightly unsettled. Dana noticed. She had gotten back from Waypoint Niner 2 days earlier and had barely slept. She sat beside Calvin in the human section and watched Khan the way she had learned to watch a room, quietly, with everything. The Council's position was clear and formally worded. The human delegation had failed for 200 years to submit navigational data for the Grand Archive. This was a violation of Council membership terms. The human territory, larger than most empires in the chamber, remained a complete blank on the shared map of the galaxy. This was, the formal statement read, unacceptable for the continued functioning of open galactic navigation and diplomacy. The Council proposed 2 things. First, a formal demand that the human delegation submit internal navigational data within 30 days. Second, if the data was not provided, a package of economic sanctions and a review of human council membership status. It was the boldest move any council body had made toward human space in recorded history. Calvin sat through the entire reading without moving. His hands were on the table in front of him, relaxed. His face was the same calm face he always wore. Pete, sitting one seat over, had gone very still. Nor was watching her tablet. Dana was watching Khan. When the floor was given to the human delegation for a response, Calvin stood up. He did not speak immediately. He looked slowly around the chamber, making brief eye contact with several delegates: Vreth, the new Kaith delegate Selu, the Mekari senior representative, 2 of the Drevathi secondary council members. He looked at them the way a man looks at people he knows, and who know him, and who understand that something important is about to be said. Then he asked his question. "Has anyone in this room," he said, in a voice that was perfectly even and easy to hear, "actually been inside our space?" The chamber was quiet. "I do not mean the border zones," Calvin continued. "I do not mean the outer stations or the diplomatic transit routes. I mean the interior, the deep interior. Has any ship from any civilization in this room traveled freely inside human space and returned with a full account of what they found?" No one answered. Calvin nodded slowly, as if the silence itself was the point. "We have been members of this council for 200 years, he said. "In that time, we have never asked any of you to enter our space. We have never advertised what is inside it. We have never offered tours. And in that time, the record shows that not one non-human ship that has gone into the interior of our territory has ever come back with a reason to go back." He paused. "I would ask this council to reflect carefully on why that might be, before it votes." The chamber stayed quiet. Khan spoke for the first time since the session began. The old Drevathi's voice was slow and careful, like someone choosing every word before setting it down. "What is in there, Ambassador?" Khan asked. Calvin looked at the High Arbiter directly. "Something that was present in this region of space before your civilization had developed written language," Calvin said. "Something that, as best we can determine, has been observing the galaxy for longer than any of us have been observing the stars. It does not threaten us. We do not entirely know why. But we have developed a working theory." Khan waited. "It likes us," Calvin said. "And we would very much prefer to keep it that way. We would also very much prefer to keep all of you at a safe distance from it, until we understand it well enough to know what a safe introduction would look like." The chamber was completely silent. Not the polite silence of people waiting for the next speaker. The heavy silence of people who had just been told something that rearranged things in their minds. Selu, the young Kaith delegate, slowly withdrew the original inquiry from the council record. The motion was accepted without comment. The sanctions vote was never called. The session ended 40 minutes later with almost nothing resolved, which was itself a kind of resolution. In the corridor afterward, Vreth fell into step beside Calvin. They walked together for a while without speaking. Eventually, Vreth said, "How long have you known?" "We have suspected since the first settlements in that region," Calvin said. "We have known, in a real and confirmed sense, for about 80 years. Vreth was quiet for a moment. "And you told no one?" "No," Calvin said. "Why?" Calvin slowed his steps slightly and glanced at the old Varoan counselor beside him. "Because we needed to understand it before we introduced it to a room full of civilizations that have spent most of their histories going to war with things they do not understand." He paused. "Would you have done it differently?" Vreth thought about it for a long time. "No," he said finally. "I do not think I would." They walked the rest of the corridor in silence. There was no official name for it in any database. The research team called it the listening post in conversation, never in writing. In writing, it was referred to by a long administrative code that meant nothing to anyone who did not already know what it was. It sat deep inside human space, not at the border, not near any of the outer colonies, but far inward, in a region that appeared on the internal human charts simply as a quiet zone with no traffic and no public record. Calvin, Dana, Nor, and Pete arrived there 1 week after the council session, brought in by Ray Sutton on a ship that did not show up on any schedule. The post itself was small, a modest set of connected modules, nothing impressive from the outside. But inside, it was unlike any research station Dana had ever seen. Every surface was covered in data. Charts, logs, signal readings, translation tables, timeline records going back 80 years. The people who worked there moved carefully and quietly, like people in a library, or like people in a place where they had learned that loud, careless things were not a good idea. Nor went straight for the maps. Ray led her to a display room where the full internal human charts were kept, the real ones, the ones never shared with the Galactic Council. Nor stood in front of them for a long time without speaking. She was a cartographer. She had spent her whole career reading maps, understanding not just what was marked on them, but how the marks related to each other, what the patterns meant, what a map said about the people who made it. And what she saw in the human charts stopped her cold. Human civilization had not spread randomly. Every colony, every station, every patrol route, every settled system, and every official boundary line. All of it, when you stepped back far enough to see the whole shape of it, formed a vast ring. A wide, careful circle around a single central point, deep in the heart of human space. Like a village built around a fire. Like a city built around something it needed to keep close but respected enough to give room. The center point had no name in any official record. The research team's informal logs called it the Resident. "What does it do?" Nor asked, when Ray joined her in the display room. "Mostly it watches," Ray said. "It has been watching for a very long time. The galaxy, the stars, everything in it. We think it has been doing this since before most of the species in the Council existed." He pulled up one of the signal logs, a long record of contact events, each one carefully dated and noted. Occasionally it responds. When something big happens, a major war, a large-scale extinction event, a civilization going dark. Something shifts in its pattern. Something changes in the signals it sends through our relay stations. "What kind of changes?" Nor asked. "Subtle ones," Ray said. "Takes years of study to read them at all. We have a translation team. They have been working on it since the program started." He brought up the translated logs on a separate display, a long list of contact events and the team's best attempts at translating what the signals meant. Nor read through them slowly. Most were marked as unresolved or partial translation only. Some were marked as possible acknowledgement. A few were marked as confirmed response. She stopped at the confirmed ones. They were short. The translations were imperfect, with notes from the team about all the ways the meaning might be slightly different. But across all of them, across 80 years of careful work, the core of every confirmed response was the same. "Still here. Still watching. Not yet." Dana read it over Nor's shoulder. Pete stood in the doorway and read it from there. Nobody said anything for a while. Calvin was at the far end of the room, standing at the viewport that looked out into open space, the quiet, empty-looking space that sat between the listening post and the center of the ring. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking out. "The Council wanted an answer," Dana said finally. "They wanted to know why the map stops at our border." Calvin did not turn around immediately. When he spoke, his voice was the same as always, calm, unhurried, choosing words carefully. "The honest answer," he said, "is that the map stops there because that is where something else's map begins." He paused. "We are, as far as we can tell, the only ones it has allowed to stay in its space. The only ones it has not moved along. We do not fully know why. We have theories. But what we do know is that every alien crew that has come in uninvited has left quickly, quietly, and has never wanted to come back." He turned from the viewport and looked at the three of them. "So we keep the map blank," he said. "We keep the neighbors at a distance. We keep learning. And we try very hard to be the kind of species that deserves to stay where we are." Dana looked at the translation on the screen. "Not yet," she read aloud. "Do you think that means something specific?" "Not yet, as in, it is waiting for something." Calvin was quiet for a moment. "I think it is watching to see what we become," he said. "I think that is what it has always been doing. With everything, everywhere. And I think the difference with us is that so far, whatever it is looking for," he glanced back out the viewport, "we have not yet given it a reason to stop." 1 week later, Nor was back at Nexus Verith, reviewing the updated files on the Grand Navigational Archive. The Council had accepted the human delegation's non-submission without further challenge, at least for now. The map had been officially refreshed. Every civilization's data was current and accurate. Human space was still a blank block. Nor was closing the archive file when she noticed something in the margin of the document. A small piece of data attached to the blank section, added at a timestamp that did not match any Council system update. It was written in no script she recognized. She ran it through the translation system, which flagged it as language of origin unknown, possible translation available. She clicked through. The translation took 3 weeks, worked by the same team at the listening post who had spent 80 years reading signals from the interior. When the result came back, it was marked with the usual notes about uncertainty and imperfect translation. The note in the margin of the galactic map read, "This space is spoken for." No one had added it. No one ever found out how it got there. The map stayed blank.